Introduction. Louis Etienne Saint-Denis was born at Versailles on September 22nd, 1788. His father, Etienne, had been piqueur in the royal stables under Louis XVI. The connoisseurs of the noble art of equitation have spoken of him with lively admiration. He was, it seems, a model of fine position on a horse, and above all, he struggled energetically for the French traditions against the anti-national school of the Anglomaniac horsemen. He had married Marie-Louise Notte, daughter of an officer of the royal kitchens. One of his great-granddaughters still recollects hearing Aunt Notte, an unmarried sister of Marie-Louise Notte, tell proudly how her father had made a cage of nougat, which had been placed on the table at one of the court fetes. There was a bird shut up in it, which flew away when it was broken, and in its flight perched on the head of Marie Antoinette. The Revolution cost Etienne Saint-Denis his place. He moved to Paris, where, for more than 50 years, he died in 1843 at the age of 89 years. He was a riding master. At 76, he still broke horses, preferably those which his enemies, the so-called innovators, had failed in training and had made unruly. After good preliminary studies, to which the writing and spelling of all his papers bear witness, Louis Etienne Saint-Denis became a clerk in the office of the Notary Colin in the Place Vendôme in 1802. He remained there 4 years. At the end of that time, taking advantage of the former relations with the Duke of Vicenza, Caulaincourt, the elder Saint-Denis secured his son's admission to the emperor's household. The youth first spent a month in the business offices of the stable, no doubt as a supernumerary or probationer. Then on May 1st, 1806, he was placed definitively on the registers with the title of student piqueur. He became under piqueur in 1808, and then having been appointed Mameluke and decorated with the name of Ali, he became assistant archivist carrier on January 1st, 1812. Indeed, he drew upon the account of his services of Louis Etienne Saint-Denis attached to the household of His Majesty the Emperor Napoleon I. In May 1806, he entered His Majesty's household as student piqueur in the departments of carriage horses. In March 1808, he went to Bayonne and Spain. In August, he started for Erfurt. When he returned to Paris, he was appointed under piqueur. Shortly afterwards, he was sent to Bayonne and Spain. He returned to France with the detachments which had remained at Valladolid. In April 1809, he started for Germany with a convoy of horses. He returned to France with his convoy. On his arrival in Paris, he took a large number of draft horses to Bayonne and then to Spain. In September 1811, he made the journey to Holland and commanded the third service of the Emperor's suite. In December, he entered the personal service of the Emperor in their private apartments as second Mameluke and accompanied His Majesty during the campaign in Russia. In 1813, during the first part of the campaign of that year, he remained on detached service at Mayence and then went to join the Emperor at Neumark. In the second part of the campaign, he accompanied His Majesty. After the passage of the Rhine, he remained at Mayence and left that city only after the foreign armies had entered Paris. When he returned to Paris, he went to Elba to join the Emperor. In 1815, he was on board the Inconstant. He was on duty with the Emperor the day he entered Grenoble. He was also on duty with His Majesty when he arrived at Fontainebleau and during all the journey from Fontainebleau to Paris. In June, he was always with the Emperor during the short campaign in Belgium, at the Battle of Ligny, and at that of Waterloo. He had left the Élysée with His Majesty, and he returned to that palace with him. He accompanied the Emperor from Malmaison to Rochefort. At the Ile of Aix, His Majesty chose him to go to America when he intended to embark on a lugger. On May 5th, 1821, he was at Longwood. It was he who made clean copies of the Emperor's dictation. All the memoirs of St. Helena, with slight exceptions, are in his hand. His protector was the Duke of Vicenza. Calanchor. Further, Saint-Denis forgets in this curriculum vitae, I don't know why, the title of which he was so proud, that of the Emperor's Librarian. Saint-Denis had married Mary Hall at St. Helena in October 18th, 1819. She was a young English Catholic born in Birmingham on December 5th, 1786, who was governess to Grand Marshal Bertrand's children. There was born to him on July 31st, 1820, a daughter, Clemence, whose godfather and godmother were General de Montesson and Countess Bertrand after the Emperor's death. The Saint-Denis family left the island. It embarked on the Camel on May 27, 1821, landed at Portsmouth on July 21st, and arrived in Paris on August 28th. Saint-Denis had but little fortune, and the legacy which the emperor had left him was not paid at once. He paid and placed his wife and children temporarily at Versailles with grandmother Nazi, and he himself lived with his parents, 34 Rue de Dragon. He had found employment. I leave the house at 5 in the morning, he wrote to his wife on May 28th, 1822, and I rarely get back to it before 8 o'clock at night. The fact that I have occupation makes me feel more strongly the desire to have you with me. Still, we must both be reasonable. This state of affairs cannot last long. What I earn is but little, but it is true. It is just the beginning. My pay will be greater as the number of pupils increase. This small sum, 30 sous a day, will pay for my lodging, which is something, and ultimately I can be head of the establishment if it succeeds, which is probable enough. A few months later, he was annoyed at not being able to find lodgings in the quarter near Luxembourg. However, he was able to find a place to live in Paris since his second daughter, Isabel, was born there on June 11th, 1826. Finally, whether the establishment did not prosper or whether Saint-Denis had left it, he decided to settle in the provinces in order to live more economically. We do not know why he chose the Saint-Denis. Perhaps he was drawn there by a friend, a retired officer de feu, who later made him his residuary legatee. Perhaps he wished to be near Marchand, his companion at St. Helena, who had settled not far away on his property at Leverger in the commune of Perigny, just outside of Auxerre. Saint-Denis spent the remainder of his life there in the Rue de Canet. Then, on the Esplanade, he left there only for short trips to Paris, notably to hasten the tardy delivery of the Emperor's legacy for the pilgrimage to St. Helena. When the question arose of bringing back the Emperor's ashes to France, Saint-Denis claimed the honor of going on that mission. This favor was granted thanks to the intervention of Monsieur Thiers. He had some slight inclination to ask for a place under the government of July. Perhaps he abandoned the idea. It was difficult for him to give up his liberty, and he asked himself, he even asked Grand Marshal Bertrand whether to accept the place from anyone but the emperor would not be to show disloyalty in some sense to his master's memory. He grew old amid the esteem of everybody in his adopted city. He was a censor of the savings bank. In 1841, he lost his wife, who had borne him a third daughter besides Clemence and Isabel, Napoleon. Mathilde, born 1827. In 1854, he was made a Knight of the Legion of Honor. He died in 1856. He left to the city of Sens some of the articles which had preserved in the memory of his emperor, the 2 volumes of Fleury de Chabillon with notes in Napoleon's handwriting, which have been published by Senator Cornet, 2 atlases in which Napoleon had made some drawings or calculations in pencils, the folio volume of the campaigns of Italy, besides personal relics, a coat with epaulettes, and the star of the Legion of Honor, a cockade from a hat, a piece of to St. Helena coffin, and a bit of one of the willows which grew over the emperor's tomb. My daughter should always remember. He always said that the emperor was my benefactor, and consequently theirs. The greater part of what I possess I owe to his kindness. Saint-Denis left souvenirs in manuscript. A legend on this subject has been given currency by Dr. Pumies de la Subetie. I was for a long time, he says in his souvenirs, d'un médecin de Paris, physician in the Saint-Denis family. The father, who died some years ago at a very advanced age, this consequently must have been written after 1843, had gone from the stables of Louis XVI, where he filled the modest office of piqueur. The son was a member of the imperial household. He was a footman. His intelligence, his devotion, his good looks won for him the good graces of the emperor, who attached him more particularly to his person and chose him to go with him to St. Helena, Saint-Denis had received but little education, but he nevertheless had the idea of writing day by day what he saw and heard. His duty constantly brought him in contact with the emperor. He had many curious things from his mouth. I have been able to run through them, and they interested me greatly. Here is a quotation which I borrow from them. Sire, qui dit Montsolon, j'ai eu occasion de voir beaucoup des Anglais de vivre au milieu d'eux, et je puis vous dire qu'ils sont bons enfants, tout de même, oui. Qui dit l'empereur, mais le gouvernement ne vaut pas le diable. Il savait bien ce qu'il faisait au Médonon pour geler les plus grands connards de l'Angleterre. It is in this grotesque, often expressive, always energetic style that this journal is written from 1801 to 1821. It becomes especially more interesting from 1814 when the master brought closer to the servant, has fewer secrets from him. It is Saint-Denis who rendered to Napoleon the last services as servant. This naturally has been still further embellished from the single page. Napoleon's librarian, as St. Helena, has been represented as a sort of illiterate groom who succeeded not without effort in performing after a fashion a task which was far above his uneducated mind. It has been supposed that the emperor forbade him to publish his journal and that Saint-Denis destroyed it after utilizing it to give his souvenirs their final form. This version is certainly spicy, but the evidence on which it rests is inaccurate. I shall say nothing of the obvious mistakes, such as the date 1801, which is absolutely impossible. That may be a mistake of reading for 1806, but the doctor's memory certainly misled him. In the first place, there is nothing in the souvenirs which corresponds either in form or in substance to the pretended extracts which he gives from it. Then Louis Etienne Saint-Denis did not leave his father's stables or riding school to go into the imperial stables. He spent 4 years as a clerk in a notary's office. An intelligent young man such as he was must certainly have improved, and supposing that he did not know it already, have learned a little French in such surroundings. Furthermore, when he entered the imperial household, it was in the business office that he was first placed. We know that he was a great and attentive reader and remained one till his death, and that he took notes on the most diverse kinds of books, mathematics, histories, even exegesis. He was also interested in grammatical questions, and that without believing unreservedly the first book which fell into his hands. One day he wrote to his wife from Paris, I should like to have the grammar which refutes that of Noel and Chaptal. Clemence knows what it is. Can a man who has been ignorant up to 33 years of age begin to interest himself in such things at that time of life? If the Duke of Vicenza chose him out of all his personnel to offer to the emperor, it was doubtless because he knew him to be sufficiently polished. If the emperor designated him to take care of his books, he must have known that he was sufficiently educated for the task. He would not have entrusted this work to a Santini or an Archambault. Saint-Denis made clean copies of the St. Helena manuscripts. When he could not decipher a word, he would substitute one of his own for the illegible text, which the emperor sometimes accepted, sometimes corrected, but without forbidding him to take these liberties. His companions recognized his superiority. You who have education for us both, wrote Pierron, the cook, the former major domo, or this, you must laugh at my style and my spelling, but you will be indulgent to a poorly educated man like me, and yet Pierron's letters themselves are those of a man who has received a solid primary education. Finally, by the time he returned to Paris, that is the time when Dr. Pommiers could have known him, his letters prove that he knew perfectly well how to spell, and that he was incapable of the barbarous style which is ascribed to him.